Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through myth and memory. Tonight, we step into the world of the ancient Greeks. Their stories were not only about gods and thunder, but about life and values. One value stood above many others: the sacred gift of hospitality. To the Greeks, welcoming a stranger was not just kindness, it was law. This law was watched over by the greatest of the Olympians, Zeus himself. He was called Zeus Xenios, the guardian of travelers and guests. To neglect a guest was to risk offending the king of gods. To offer bread and water was to honor him. In a time of long roads and uncertain journeys, this law meant survival. A wanderer might be weary, hungry, and lost under the open sky. A warm fire, a cup of wine, a kind word, these became sacred acts. For who knew if the traveler was mortal or perhaps a god in disguise? The hearth was a bridge, linking the heart of the host to the guest. And Zeus watched over this bridge, blessing those who kept it strong. So let us walk together into these old tales of welcome, stories where kindness shines brighter than gold or power, and where every guest carries a spark of the divine within. The ancient Greeks lived in a world where travel was slow and uncertain. Journeys stretched across mountains, seas, and dusty roads. Travelers often faced hunger, storms, and the fear of the unknown. In such a world, hospitality was not a luxury, but a sacred duty. This duty was known by a powerful name, Xenia. Xenia was more than kindness. It was a divine law. Hosts and guests were bound by invisible threads of respect. The host welcomed the guest with food, water, and shelter. The guest, in turn, honored the home with gratitude and respect. This exchange built trust in a land where strangers were common. But it was not only social custom that made Xenia so important. Over it stood the watchful eye of Zeus, the king of gods. In this role, he was called Zeus Xenios, guardian of strangers. To mistreat a guest was not only rude, it was dangerous, for it meant defying the will of Zeus himself. The Greeks believed a guest might carry more than weary feet. A stranger might hide divine presence beneath simple clothes. Thus, every visitor at the door could be a test of the soul, a test of generosity, kindness, and reverence for the divine. A poor man offering bread still honored Zeus Xenios fully. A wealthy man refusing aid risked dishonor in Zeus's sight. This belief shaped how families greeted travelers at their gates. The hearth fire was lit not only for warmth but for welcome. A cup of wine, a loaf of bread, and clean water were sacred. These small acts carried more weight than treasures or armies. To invite a guest in was to open one's heart to the gods. Greek stories are filled with lessons about the power of Xenia. They remind us that hospitality was not a choice, but a bond. The host was expected to protect the guest as family. Even if the guest was unknown, they shared a sacred tie. This bond could last long after the visit had ended. Sometimes, gifts were exchanged as a mark of lasting friendship. These tokens were reminders that once, two lives had crossed paths, and those paths, however brief, were blessed by Zeus himself. Poets and storytellers honored this law in their tales. They told of kings, peasants, and wanderers, all bound by Xenia. Each story whispered the same truth: kindness protects the soul. Zeus Xenios was more than a watcher of rules. He was a guardian of the space between hearts. The guest brought need, the host brought care, and balance was made. This balance kept communities safe and travelers alive. For in a harsh world, no one knew when they might be the guest. And so, the law of Xenia was both shield and bridge. It shielded travelers from cruelty and bridged homes with strangers. Every offering of food or shelter echoed with divine meaning. Every welcome at the door was a prayer without words. The Greeks did not see hospitality as weakness or burden. They saw it as a strength that honored Zeus himself. Thus, Zeus Xenios was praised not only in temples but in homes. Every hearth became a small altar to his protection. Every host who gave freely became part of his sacred order. In this way, the law of Xenia shaped both myth and life. It made kindness a divine act and cruelty a grave offense. It taught people to see the face of the stranger with reverence and to remember that within every guest, the gods might dwell. So, when we think of Zeus, we need not imagine only thunder. We may also imagine a quiet hearth, a warm fire, a humble meal. There, in the act of welcome, his true power was revealed. For Zeus as protector of strangers was also Zeus as protector of love. In the ancient world, travel was never easy, and safety was never guaranteed. Roads wound through forests, mountains, and lonely coastlines. A traveler might spend days walking without finding a village or home. Food was scarce, and water was often uncertain on the journey. At night, wild winds or sudden storms could strike without warning. Strangers were exposed to hunger, cold, and the fear of the unknown. In such a world, the welcome of a host was a gift beyond price. A loaf of bread could mean the difference between despair and hope. A roof overhead could turn fear into rest and gratitude. This is why hospitality was not only expected, but celebrated. It created trust where fear might otherwise grow between strangers. Imagine a weary traveler approaching the gates of a city. Dust clings to his clothes, and his eyes carry the mark of exhaustion. He does not know if the people inside will offer kindness or rejection. But if the city honors Zeus Xenios, he will not be turned away. He will be met with bread, water, and a place to rest. This sacred duty was not only for the rich or powerful. Even the poor, with little to give, could still honor the law. A crust of bread and a corner of floor could fulfill the bond. What mattered was not wealth, but the heart of the offering. The Greeks believed Zeus watched over these exchanges carefully. Every act of welcome was a prayer offered in silence. Every gesture of kindness carried the weight of divine blessing. To neglect a stranger was to invite dishonor and shame. To harm a guest was to provoke the anger of Zeus himself. Thus, hospitality became a form of protection for all. It protected the weak from cruelty and the strong from arrogance. It reminded people that power was nothing without compassion. Festivals often celebrated the joy of sharing food and shelter. Families prepared meals not only for neighbors, but for wanderers. Stories told at the fire praised those who opened their homes. Children grew up hearing that kindness was the mark of honor. The duty of Xenia became part of their lives from birth. Travelers carried these lessons with them across seas and lands. When they were hosts, they gave. When they were guests, they remembered. This cycle kept the bond alive through generations and journeys. The need for such a law was clear in those times. Nations were young, and laws were fragile, but hospitality was firm. It was a law carried not on stone tablets, but in human hearts. Zeus Xenios gave this law strength by watching over it. His name reminded both host and guest of the sacred bond. The fear of his displeasure kept cruelty away from the hearth. The hope of his blessing encouraged generosity even in hardship. Thus, every home could be more than a shelter. It could be a temple of kindness, guarded by Zeus himself. Hospitality was not weakness, but a form of quiet power. It turned strangers into allies and wanderers into friends. It transformed uncertain roads into networks of trust and memory. Even rulers measured their honor by how they treated the guest. A king's greatness was judged not only by wars, but by welcome. The Greeks believed the hearth fire connected all who shared it. To sit together at a meal was to share in a sacred act. The food was simple, but the meaning was vast and eternal. It was the proof that even in a harsh and dangerous world, humanity could create spaces of warmth and safety. And in every such space, the presence of Zeus Xenios was felt. He was the unseen guest at every table, the silent witness. He blessed the hands that gave and watched over those who received. Thus, the hardships of the road made hospitality not just tradition. They made it a foundation of trust, faith, and survival. And above it all stood Zeus, the protector of strangers and guests. The Greeks believed that the world was full of hidden mysteries. Among these mysteries was the idea of the unseen guest. This belief held that any stranger might be more than they appear. A traveler at the door could be a farmer, a merchant, or a god. The divine was thought to walk among mortals, hidden in plain sight. Sometimes, the gods tested humanity not with storms, but with presence. They came disguised as wanderers, hungry, tired, and in need. The test was simple, yet profound. Would mortals show kindness? Would a house open its doors? Or would it turn away? This idea gave every meeting with a stranger great importance. It turned the act of hospitality into a sacred moment. When a family welcomed a guest, they honored more than custom. They honored the possibility of divinity hidden beneath dusty clothes. No one could be sure who knocked upon the door at night. That uncertainty demanded generosity, even when resources were scarce. A simple meal of bread, olives, and water became holy. A straw bed in the corner became an altar of compassion. For who knew if the guest was Zeus himself in disguise? Zeus Xenios was believed to wander the earth with watchful eyes. He observed how mortals treated those who sought shelter and food. In stories, he rewarded the humble who shared their little, and he remembered those who closed their doors with pride. This belief kept the spirit of Xenia alive in daily life. It was not fear alone, but reverence that guided the people. They saw in every stranger the reflection of something divine. The hearth fire, glowing warm in the dark, was more than flame. It symbolized the light of welcome that reached into the unknown. Travelers carried tales of homes that welcomed or turned them away. A host's reputation could travel farther than armies or ships. To be known as generous was to shine with lasting honor. To be known as cruel was to live under Zeus's shadow. Thus, the unseen guest shaped the hearts of both rich and poor. The wealthy might share feasts and golden cups with visitors. The poor might share humble bread, yet both gifts held equal worth. For Zeus judged not the richness of the table, but the spirit. A gift from an empty hand was as sacred as gold. The unseen guest carried lessons of humility for the mighty. Kings who sat on thrones were not above this sacred law. Their palaces, like cottages, were places of divine testing. Every gate was a threshold where mortal met immortal in silence. And every act of kindness echoed in the halls of Olympus. The Greeks told stories where gods rewarded those who showed compassion. These tales reminded listeners that the divine walked among them. They warned against arrogance, greed, and the closing of doors. They praised humility, generosity, and the courage to give. Even today, the image of the unseen guest carries meaning. It asks us to look at strangers with gentler eyes. It invites us to see beyond appearances, beyond poverty or weariness. It reminds us that kindness to one is kindness to all. The unseen guest is a mirror reflecting our own humanity. It shows whether we choose fear and suspicion or trust and care. Every traveler we meet might be carrying more than a bag. They might be carrying lessons, blessings, or even divine presence. The Greeks lived with this awareness as part of their daily lives, and through them, the voice of Zeus Xenios was always near. The law of hospitality became more than survival, it became reverence. Every home, no matter how small, could become a temple of welcome. And every stranger, no matter how humble, could be a messenger of the gods. So the unseen guest walked silently through fields, towns, and roads. He waited at doors, testing hearts, and revealing their true nature. And wherever kindness triumphed, Zeus smiled, and the hearth glowed brighter. There is an old tale told in the villages of Greece, simple yet profound. It is a story of a poor stranger and two very different hosts. One was wealthy, surrounded by abundance and fine possessions. The other was humble, with little more than bread and water. The stranger arrived at the gates of a grand estate first. He knocked gently, seeking food, warmth, and a night of rest. The servants looked him over, dusty from the road, clothes torn. They turned him away, saying the master had no place for beggars. The rich man, seated at a long table, ignored the traveler's plea. He chose comfort and pride over compassion and hospitality. The stranger left silently, carrying nothing but weariness in his steps. That night, he came to a small cottage at the edge of a field. Inside, a farmer and his wife were finishing their modest supper. They had little, coarse bread, a jug of water, and olives. When the traveler knocked, they welcomed him without hesitation. They shared their meal, dividing their bread into 3 equal parts. The wife offered the guest her portion, smiling despite hunger. The farmer lit an extra lamp so their guest could feel at ease. They gave him their only blanket so he would rest warmly. Though poor, their generosity shone brighter than the rich man's wealth. When morning came, the stranger revealed himself as Zeus in disguise. He blessed the farmer and his wife for their open hearts. Their fields grew fertile, their home filled with peace and light. The rich man, who turned away the guest, received no blessing. He remained surrounded by wealth, yet untouched by divine favor. This story was told again and again in the ancient world. It reminded people that true honor lies not in gold or silver. It lives in kindness, in the willingness to share what little we have. The parable showed that Zeus Xenios watched closely from above. He did not measure gifts by size, but by sincerity of spirit. The smallest crumb given with love outweighed feasts given with pride. In this way, hospitality was both test and reward. Every traveler at the door carried the possibility of divine presence. Every act of welcome carried the promise of divine blessing. The Greeks used such stories to teach children from an early age. They taught that turning away a stranger was turning away Zeus, and that to give freely was to join in sacred harmony. The poor stranger in these tales was never just a wanderer. He was a mirror, reflecting the heart of the one who received him. The rich man revealed greed and pride, and so he was empty. The farmer revealed compassion and humility, and so he was full. The lesson echoed through villages, cities, and palaces alike. It was not wealth that defined a person's honor, but generosity. A cottage could become greater than a palace if it welcomed kindly. A palace could become smaller than a cottage if it turned cold. This balance of values shaped the soul of Greek society. Through it, Zeus Xenios remained not distant, but near, always watching. The stranger at the gate was a sacred opportunity, never a burden. Even the humblest family could shine in the eyes of the gods. Their bread, though coarse, was sweeter than honey when shared. Their water, though simple, became more precious than wine when offered. And the warmth of their hearth became as radiant as Olympus itself. So the tale of the poor stranger lived on in memory. It reminded each listener that greatness is found in kindness. It taught that wealth without compassion is an empty shell, and that even the smallest act of hospitality honors Zeus Xenios. Thus, the poor stranger walked on through story and time. He still knocks on doors in the hearts of all who hear. And his presence asks us the same question again and again. Will we open our hands, or will we turn him away? The answer reveals not only who we are, but whom we honor. And in that answer, the gaze of Zeus still lingers, silent and eternal. In the heart of Greek mountains stood a village known for its ancient customs. The people lived close to the earth, guided by stories older than memory. Among them was a tradition, strong and sacred, the welcoming of guests. No traveler was ever turned away without bread, water, and a resting place. For they believed Zeus Xenios himself walked in the shape of a stranger. One quiet evening, as shadows stretched across the olive groves, a traveler arrived. His cloak was worn thin, his sandals cracked, and his steps slow with weariness. The villagers gathered around, curious yet respectful, sensing something unusual in his presence. An elder woman stepped forward first, offering a jug of water with steady hands. Her kindness set the tone, and soon others followed with food and blankets. The traveler spoke little, but his eyes carried a depth beyond ordinary men. He thanked them, his voice soft yet resonant, as though echoing through stone. That night, he stayed in the home of a simple shepherd. The shepherd had little to give, but shared his bread and cheese gladly. He laid fresh straw for the traveler to rest, and offered his own cloak. In the dim glow of the hearth, stories passed between host and guest. The shepherd spoke of harsh winters, lost sheep, and the joy of spring. The traveler listened closely, nodding as if every word carried hidden importance. When morning came, the traveler rose with a calm, radiant expression. He spoke a blessing. May your flocks be safe and your fields abundant. With those words, he departed, leaving behind a sense of wonder and peace. In the days that followed, the shepherd noticed strange yet joyful changes. His flock grew stronger, the sickly lambs recovering as if touched by light. The fields blossomed early, rain falling gently in just the right measure. Neighbors whispered that the traveler must have been more than a mortal man. Some believed it was Zeus Xenios himself, rewarding kindness shown in humility. The village began to tell the tale, passing it on to their children. They spoke of the importance of honoring strangers without fear or suspicion. They said, "When you open your door, you open it to the gods." The story carried through festivals, sung in songs beneath the open sky. It reminded every villager that generosity created unseen ripples in the world. A loaf of bread could become the seed of divine blessing. A jug of water could quench thirst beyond the body, reaching the soul. The shepherd, once poor, found his spirit richer than ever before. He continued to welcome travelers, never knowing which might be a god. For him, every guest became sacred, every visit a chance for grace. This story lingered through centuries, shaping how villages treated outsiders. Hospitality became not just custom, but sacred duty woven into daily life. It taught that Zeus watched not from afar, but through mortal encounters, that each knock at the door was both test and gift, and that compassion offered freely was greater than any treasure hoarded. The shepherd's tale was simple, yet it touched every listener deeply. It showed that even the humblest offering could shine in divine eyes. It reminded people that wealth of heart surpassed wealth of gold, and it echoed the eternal promise of Zeus Xenios, "Whoever honors the stranger honors me, and whoever turns them away turns me away." Thus, in villages and cities, around fires, and in temples, the story endured. It lived not only as myth, but as guidance for how to live. A call to kindness, a reminder that the divine walks among us, and that every stranger carries a spark of Olympus in their steps. High upon the hills of Arcadia, shepherds told stories as stars lit the sky. Among them was one tale cherished across generations and seasons. It was about a feast, not of kings, but of hearts wide open. In a small town by the river, preparations were underway for a festival. Every year, people gathered to honor Zeus, the protector of strangers. The festival was not about gold, silver, or splendid sacrifice. It was about opening doors, sharing meals, and welcoming every traveler. Villagers decorated their homes with garlands and lamps glowing softly. Children carried baskets of bread, ready to hand out freely. The air smelled of honey cakes, olives, and roasted grains. As dusk approached, strangers began to arrive from far and near. Merchants, wanderers, and weary pilgrims followed the light of the fires. No one asked their names or questioned their origins. Every hand was greeted warmly, every face treated with respect. The elder of the town stood at the central square and spoke. "Let no one eat alone tonight, for all belong to this table." The crowd cheered, lifting cups of wine in joyous agreement. Long tables were set across the square, filled with simple food. Bread was broken, cheese was shared, and cups were passed freely. Stories filled the night. Laughter mingled with music and dancing. Children played among the guests, weaving joy through the gathering. Some strangers told tales of distant lands and unknown seas. Others simply sat quietly, grateful for food and warmth. But all felt the same invisible presence that watched over them. For they knew Zeus Xenios was near, measuring hearts, not wealth. The poorest man at the table offered his last fig to a guest. The richest merchant poured wine not for himself, but for strangers. In these small acts, the divine was honored more than temples. As the night grew late, a hush fell over the crowd. An old traveler rose, his cloak ragged but his eyes shining. He raised his hands and spoke in a voice clear and strong. "Tonight, you have lived the law of the gods. Tonight, you have welcomed not just strangers, but the sacred itself." The villagers listened, their hearts beating with quiet awe. The traveler's words carried weight beyond mortal speech. Some whispered it was Zeus himself, walking among them unseen. Others believed it was his messenger, bringing approval from Olympus. Either way, the blessing of that night lingered for years. Crops grew steady, storms spared the town, and peace endured, not because of wealth or sacrifice, but because of kindness. Hospitality became the true altar, generosity the true offering. Parents reminded children of that sacred feast by the river. They said, "Remember, every guest carries the eyes of the gods." And so, the tradition lived on, woven into their way of life. For them, to share bread was to share eternity itself. To open a door was to open a path to Olympus. The feast was more than celebration, it was communion with the divine. The story of that night spread far beyond the river town. Travelers carried it to mountains, islands, and distant coasts. Wherever it was told, people listened and nodded knowingly, for all understood that the heart of Zeus Xenios was clear. It was not found in riches, nor in power, nor in temples. It was found in bread broken with strangers and hands extended in welcome. Thus, the feast became legend, a living parable for all who heard it. And to this day, it reminds us that the divine sits at every table, waiting quietly in the form of a guest, watching how we choose to give. Along the coast of the Aegean Sea, fishermen told stories while mending their nets. One tale stood above the rest, passed on with reverence and care. It spoke of a storm, a traveler, and the quiet justice of Zeus Xenios. The sea had grown restless, waves rising high against the wooden boats. A traveler, weary and salt-soaked, arrived at a small fishing village. His clothes clung to his skin. His eyes carried the weight of exhaustion. The villagers hesitated, unsure whether to welcome a stranger from the sea. But an old fisherman stepped forward, his hands rough yet steady. He placed a cloak on the traveler's shoulders and said, "Come inside." His wife brought warm soup, simple fish stew with bread beside it. The traveler ate slowly, gratitude shining through his silence. That night, the storm struck harder, winds howling across the coast. Boats broke their moorings, nets tore, and waves swallowed the shoreline. But the fisherman's home, though small, remained untouched by the fury. The traveler watched quietly, his expression calm and almost divine. In the morning, he blessed the fisherman and his wife. "Your kindness shields you as surely as walls against the storm," he said. The fisherman bowed his head, not fully understanding the words. The traveler walked away, leaving only footprints on the wet sand. Days later, other villagers who had turned away strangers suffered losses. Their boats were wrecked, their homes battered, their nets beyond repair. They whispered among themselves, realizing the storm was more than chance. They remembered Zeus Xenios, guardian of guests and strangers alike. The story spread quickly across harbors and islands. Sailors carried it with them, warning others never to refuse hospitality. The message was clear. Kindness was protection. Cruelty carried its own storm. Children learned the tale as they watched nets being repaired. Their parents told them, "Remember, the sea listens, and so do the gods." Hospitality became not only sacred, but also survival by the water's edge. Even a small act, like offering soup or a blanket, held great weight. For every traveler could be Zeus in disguise, testing mortal hearts. And every act of welcome could calm storms before they rose. The fisherman and his wife became symbols of humble generosity. Their home was visited by many, seeking the blessing of their kindness. But they never boasted, never sought riches or honor for their deed. They simply opened their door, again and again, to whoever arrived. The gods favored such simplicity, where giving was natural, not forced. The tale endured because it mirrored the rhythm of the sea. Unpredictable, vast, and often harsh, yet softened by human kindness. The fisherman who repeated the story knew its truth well, for storms came often, but compassion could bring peace even to the waves. Zeus Xenios, through this tale, reminded mortals of their sacred duty, to welcome the lost, to feed the hungry, to clothe the weary, and in doing so, to honor not just man, but the divine itself. The story still drifts like sea foam along the Aegean shores. It whispers through harbors, in the cries of gulls and crash of waves. It reminds each listener that kindness is stronger than the storm, and that in every traveler, the gaze of Zeus may quietly rest. In the valleys of Thessaly, farmers worked the fields beneath the watchful sky. There, a story lived among them, teaching the power of silent kindness. It began with a traveler who wandered alone through fields of wheat. His sandals were torn, and his lips cracked with thirst and hunger. The sun blazed high, and no village was in sight for miles. Finally, he came upon a farmhouse, standing quietly at the edge of a meadow. A young woman worked outside, carrying water from the well to the animals. She saw the stranger approach and, without hesitation, offered him her jug. The water was cool, drawn fresh from the stone well. The traveler drank deeply, life returning to his weary frame. The woman then broke a loaf of bread and gave him half. She asked no questions, demanded no payment, and offered no suspicion. Her kindness was simple, natural, as though it were the only way. Inside the farmhouse, her family welcomed the traveler with gentle smiles. They gave him a place at their table, though food was scarce. The meal was plain barley bread, olives, and goat's milk. Yet it was given freely, with laughter and conversation to warm the heart. The traveler listened, speaking little, but his gaze was filled with gratitude. When night fell, he was given a blanket and a spot by the hearth. The fire glowed softly, wrapping him in comfort after the long road. The next morning, he departed quietly, leaving behind a blessing unspoken. Soon after, the farmhouse seemed touched by quiet fortune. The fields grew greener, the crops heavier with grain. The animals thrived, healthy and strong, producing more than before. Neighbors noticed the change and whispered among themselves. They asked how such blessings could come to a simple family. The young woman only smiled, recalling the thirsty traveler she had helped. She never boasted, never claimed reward, only carried on with kindness. Over time, the story spread across Thessaly as a lesson. It taught that true hospitality was not loud or grand. It was in small gestures, like water offered without hesitation. It was in bread shared with strangers, even when little remained. The farmers repeated the tale to their children during harvest evenings. They said, "Zeus walks with the humble, testing hearts, not wealth." Children grew up learning that generosity was as vital as planting seeds. Without kindness, no harvest could be truly abundant. The traveler in the tale was believed by many to be Zeus himself, disguised not in splendor, but in dust and weariness of the road. He had come not to demand, but to see who would give freely. And the farmhouse family, without knowing, had honored the divine. Thus, the lesson of Thessaly became clear and enduring. Hospitality was not about grandeur, but sincerity. It was not the size of the gift, but the openness of the heart. The young woman's simple jug of water became a sacred act. Her half loaf of bread carried more weight than gold. Through her, the valley remembered that kindness creates unseen blessings. The story still lingers in the wind that passes over the fields. It is carried in the songs of shepherds and the prayers of farmers. It reminds all who hear that the gods see not appearances but actions, and that in each stranger lies an opportunity to welcome Olympus itself. So, when weary footsteps sound at the door, the people of Thessaly recall they know the right response is not suspicion, but open hands, for every act of kindness, however small, ripples through eternity, and Zeus Xenios smiles upon those who give without counting the cost. High in the mountains of Arcadia, shepherds tended their flocks beneath the vast sky. Their songs echoed through valleys, carrying stories of gods and mortals alike. One story, soft but enduring, spoke of Zeus Xenios and a humble test. It began with a young shepherd, alone with his sheep on a cold evening. The sun had sunk low, painting the peaks gold before fading into shadow. A traveler appeared on the narrow path, his cloak frayed and feet dusty. The shepherd, though poor, welcomed him with a smile and open hands. He offered goat's milk, cheese, and a seat by the small fire. The traveler accepted, his eyes reflecting gratitude more than words could. The sheep huddled near, their bells ringing softly in the twilight air. The shepherd told simple stories of lost lambs and starry nights. The traveler listened quietly, his presence both ordinary and extraordinary. When night grew colder, the shepherd shared his own blanket without hesitation. The fire burned low, yet warmth seemed to grow from their company. In the morning, the traveler rose, and placed a hand on the shepherd's shoulder. "Your kindness will be your strength," he said, his voice calm and steady. He disappeared along the path, leaving only the sound of moving wind. Soon after, the shepherd found his flock multiplied, strong and unharmed. No wolves troubled them, no sickness spread, and the pastures stayed green. The blessing was quiet, not thunderous, but steady as flowing water. Villagers noticed the change and asked the shepherd his secret. He only shrugged, saying he had shared fire, food, and kindness. The villagers realized the truth, that the traveler had been Zeus Xenios, disguised as always, to test the hearts of those he met. The tale spread among mountain dwellers, reminding them of sacred duty, to treat strangers not with fear, but with warmth and respect. Children grew up hearing that even a shepherd could host a god. Hospitality was not measured by wealth, but by sincerity of spirit. A cloak shared, a meal given, a fire kept warm for another. These small acts carried the weight of Olympus itself. The shepherd's story became part of the songs sung in mountain meadows. Folk tunes carried the lesson with pipes and flutes beneath starlight. Offer bread, share warmth, for Zeus may walk the path unseen. The melody lingered on lips of travelers and herders across the land. In time, the shepherd grew old, but his kindness never waned. He welcomed strangers still, though his flock was now cared for by sons. He often told them, "Generosity keeps storms away and blessings near." They listened, knowing his words came not from books but from life. The gods favor the humble, the kind, and the open-hearted. Such was the enduring truth of Zeus Xenios in Arcadia's highlands. Even today, shepherds recall the tale when they guide flocks at dusk. They speak of the God who rewards not strength but compassion. And they remember the simple shepherd who turned a stranger into a friend. For in every act of welcome, there is divinity hidden in plain sight. The mountain winds still carry this story across valleys and peaks. It whispers that no gesture of kindness is ever too small, and that those who honor strangers honor Zeus himself, silently watching. Thus, the shepherd's fire still burns, not in wood, but in memory. Its glow reaches across generations, warming hearts with timeless truth. Kindness, they say, is the true hearth that never grows cold. In the bustling city of Athens, travelers arrived daily from distant lands. The streets were filled with merchants, poets, and strangers passing by. Yet in the noise of trade and talk, a lesson of Zeus Xenios remained. It was told through the story of a poor innkeeper near the city gates. He owned only a few wooden tables and straw mats for rest. His meals were simple: bowls of lentils, bread, and watered wine. Still, he greeted every guest with warmth, no matter how tired or poor. One evening, a traveler came with nothing but dust on his cloak. He was weary, silent, and looked upon with suspicion by passers-by. Others ignored him, turning away, but the innkeeper welcomed him inside. He offered a seat, food, and water to wash away the road. The traveler accepted, his eyes soft with gratitude, though he spoke little. That night, the inn filled with laughter as strangers shared stories. The traveler listened, smiling gently, as though he belonged among them. When dawn arrived, he left quietly, but not before blessing the inn. The words lingered in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Those who welcome strangers welcome peace into their own homes. In the weeks that followed, the inn began to flourish. Travelers spoke of it kindly, calling it a place of safety. Merchants stopped more often. Poets recited verses by lamplight. Even those with little coin found rest and kindness at its tables. The innkeeper never grew wealthy, but his house was always full. Neighbors, once doubtful, began to admire his quiet generosity. They saw that his heart was richer than any golden treasury. Rumors spread that the mysterious traveler had been Zeus himself. Disguised as always, he had tested the hospitality of mortals. And as always, the reward was given to kindness, not wealth. The Athenians retold the story in agora and theater alike. It reminded them that even in a city of brilliance and pride, the simplest act of welcome still carried divine importance. Children learned to greet strangers with respect and open hearts. Teachers repeated the lesson: Hospitality binds us closer than laws. The poor innkeeper became a symbol not of greatness, but of goodness. His story stood as proof that even the humblest house could honor Zeus. And so the tale spread beyond Athens, carried by sailors and traders. It traveled across seas, through villages, and along dusty roads, always reminding mortals that kindness was never forgotten by the gods. Even today, the story lingers in the ruins and stones of Athens. Tourists walk past columns, hearing echoes of ancient voices, voices that say, "Treat strangers well, for Zeus may stand at your door." The inn itself is long gone, but its memory is not. It remains in the lessons passed from mouth to ear through time. Hospitality is not an ornament, but the foundation of peace. It turns strangers into friends and travelers into kin. This was, and is, the gift of Zeus Xenios to mankind, to remind mortals that the smallest kindness is divine in itself. So when footsteps pause at the threshold, the choice is clear. To open the door is to honor not just man, but Olympus. For in the heart of every guest lies the reflection of the gods, and the blessing of Zeus Xenios rests upon those who welcome.